The bustling rhythm of the airport lounge drowned in chatter, rolling suitcases, and the constant chime of flight announcements. He sat there, tailored suit sharp, gold watch gleaming, and an air of untouchable authority surrounding him like an invisible wall. The millionaire was used to commanding boardrooms, bending markets with a single phone call, and never being disturbed. His laptop sat open in front of him, contracts waiting for his signature, stock prices flickering across the screen. Yet, even surrounded by all his wealth and success, his eyes seemed empty, his face carved with lines that spoke of both power and loneliness. It was then that a small, hesitant voice broke through the chaos of the lounge. "Excuse me, sir." He looked up, almost irritated. A little girl, no older than 7, stood in front of him clutching a crumpled envelope so tightly it was wrinkled beyond repair. Her hair was tied in uneven pigtails, her dress was slightly worn, and her shoes were scuffed, but her wide eyes glimmered with a mixture of fear and determination. She didn't look like she belonged in this sleek, polished world of first-class lounges and designer luggage. He frowned, ready to brush her off. "Where are your parents?" he asked briskly, glancing around. She shook her head quickly, as if scared he wouldn't listen if she didn't get the words out right away. Can you read this letter? It's really important." Her voice trembled on the last words, and she pushed the envelope toward him with small hands that shook. For a moment, he didn't move. Nobody ever interrupted him, let alone a child. He considered waving her away, telling her to find her father or whoever was responsible for her. But something about the urgency in her eyes, the way she hugged the envelope as if it held her entire world, made him pause. He took the envelope slowly, his expensive cufflinks glinting under the lounge lights. The paper was cheap, torn at the corners, and covered in doodles of hearts and stars. The handwriting on the front was large and clumsy, letters uneven as though written by someone still learning how to hold a pencil. It was addressed simply, to Mom. His chest tightened unexpectedly. He hadn't even opened it, but the weight of that simple phrase pressed against him in a way his billion-dollar empire never had. The girl tugged at his sleeve, looking up at him anxiously. I don't know all the big words," she confessed in a whisper. "But if you read it out loud, maybe my mom can hear it better." He stared at her, bewildered. His world was contracts, mergers, profit margins. This wasn't part of his schedule, wasn't part of his carefully constructed armor. And yet, for the first time in years, his hand trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter. Around them, people in the lounge began to notice. Some glanced over curiously, surprised to see the famously stoic man giving his attention to a child. But he barely registered their stares. His focus was on the little girl sitting on the chair beside him now, swinging her legs nervously as she watched him. "Please," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "It's really important." For reasons he couldn't explain, he nodded. And in that instant, the walls he had built around himself began to crack, though he didn't yet know just how much this small piece of paper, and this fragile little girl, were about to change his life. His fingers brushed against the thin, fragile sheet of paper as he unfolded the letter, careful not to tear it any further. The little girl's gaze stayed fixed on him, her small hands gripping the edge of her chair as if she feared he might stop reading before he even began. He cleared his throat, the sound oddly rough, as though unused to speaking. Softly, the handwriting sprawled unevenly across the page, large letters mixed with small, some words misspelled but determined. He began to read aloud, his voice low at first, almost hesitant. "Dear Mom in heaven, I miss you every day. I wish you could come back so I can hug you. Daddy says you're with the angels, but sometimes I still look for you at night. I'm trying to be good and brave, because I know you want me to. I love you forever." The words caught in his throat. He blinked, startled by the sudden sting in his eyes. Around him, the lounge buzzed faintly, but it was as though the world had muted itself to let this moment exist. His polished, commanding voice began to falter as he continued. "Today I drew you a picture in school. It's me and Daddy holding your hand in the middle. I hope the angels give it to you. Sometimes I hear Daddy crying when he thinks I'm asleep. I tell him you wouldn't want him to be sad, but I don't think he hears me. Please tell him it's okay." The girl's lips trembled as she listened, her eyes locked on his face. She wasn't crying, not yet. Instead, she leaned closer, almost as if she believed every syllable carried her message higher, closer to the heavens. The millionaire swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as he forced himself to keep reading. He had stood in front of investors worth billions and never faltered, but this little letter written in broken sentences threatened to shatter him completely. Sometimes I feel scared when I don't see you. But I remember what you said, that you're always in my heart. So I put my hand on my chest and pretend you're hugging me. Can you feel it, Mom? I hope you can. Please don't forget me. I'll never forget you. The girl's small hand slipped into his then, warm and trembling, and for a moment, he almost forgot to breathe. He looked down at her, but her eyes were shut tightly, as if she were picturing her mother listening from somewhere far away. He forced himself to finish. I love you, Mommy. I love you the most in the whole world. Your little girl, Sophie. The silence that followed was deafening. The millionaire lowered the letter slowly, his vision blurred with tears he had not allowed himself in decades. His throat ached from holding them back, his chest heavy with emotions he thought he'd buried beneath power, money, and success. Sophie opened her eyes then, blinking up at him with raw hope. Do you think she heard it? She asked softly, her voice so fragile it nearly broke him. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had no boardroom answer, no clever remark. All he could do was nod, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, I think she did. Her shoulders sagged with relief, and she let out a tiny sigh, clutching the letter against her heart. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The look on her face said it all. To her, he hadn't just read words on a page. He had carried her love into the air, loud enough for heaven to hear. And to him, it felt as though he had carried something else too, an unbearable truth he could no longer ignore, a pain he recognized but had locked away for far too long. For the first time in years, his hands shook not from deals or deadlines, but from the weight of someone else's grief reflected back at him. The millionaire sat frozen, the letter still trembling in his hands. Around him, life in the airport lounge carried on as though nothing extraordinary had happened, luggage wheels rolling, phones buzzing, laughter echoing from another corner. But to him, the world felt eerily still. Sophie clutched her letter to her chest, her small face tilted up at him with an innocence that stripped him bare. He wanted to speak, to offer her words of comfort that would sound steady and reassuring, but his throat burned with a lump. He couldn't swallow. Her question echoed in his mind. Do you think she heard it? He had answered yes, but the truth was that he wasn't sure if he even believed in such things. He hadn't believed in much of anything for a very long time. A flood of memories he had kept locked away pushed their way into his thoughts. He was no longer sitting in a glossy leather chair surrounded by businessmen and travelers. He was a boy again, standing in a small, dimly lit bedroom. His mother lay weak on the bed, her face pale, her voice a whisper as she told him to be strong. He had been only 10, clutching her hand and begging her not to go. And then she was gone, leaving him with a father too busy working to notice the pain carved deep into his son's heart. He had learned young that tears were a weakness. He hardened himself, built walls higher than anyone could climb, and filled the cracks with ambition. He told himself he didn't need anyone. Love was fleeting, success was permanent, and so he chased it, money, power, recognition. Yet sitting beside this fragile little girl, he realized he had never truly outrun the emptiness she had just touched so effortlessly with a single letter. Sophie noticed his silence. She reached out again, her tiny hand brushing his sleeve as though to anchor him back from wherever his mind had gone. It's okay if you feel sad, she said softly. Daddy says only strong people can cry. Her words pierced him deeper than anything had in years. He let out a shaky breath, the kind that felt foreign to his chest. Slowly, almost against his will, his vision blurred again, and this time he didn't blink it away. He let the tears fall. They slipped down his cheeks silently, cutting through the polished mask he had worn for so long. Sophie's eyes widened. She didn't recoil or look embarrassed. Instead, she squeezed his hand tighter, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to comfort a man everyone else feared to approach. He bowed his head, trying to hide the storm inside him. I lost my mom too, he admitted in a voice that cracked with vulnerability. The confession felt heavy and raw, as though prying open a door he had bolted shut decades ago. I was about your age. And I never got to tell her goodbye. The little girl's lips trembled, and she whispered, "That's why you understand." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. For years, he had surrounded himself with people who wanted his money, his influence, his name. Yet it took a child with nothing to give but honesty to see the part of him he had buried. And strangely, in her gaze, he didn't see pity. He saw recognition, as though two lonely souls had found each other in the unlikeliest of places. More tears slid down his face, and he didn't care who noticed. In that moment, he wasn't a millionaire, wasn't a businessman, wasn't the untouchable man who built an empire. He was just a little boy again, missing his mother. And beside him, Sophie sat quietly, her small hand still holding his, teaching him the one lesson all his wealth had never given him: how to be human again. For the first time in decades, the ache inside him felt less like an endless void and more like a bridge, a fragile connection between his pain and hers, between his past and the future he had yet to discover. The sound of hurried footsteps pulled him from the depth of his thoughts. A man in his mid-30s, hair slightly disheveled, clothes creased with the exhaustion of someone carrying too many burdens, appeared at the edge of the lounge. His eyes darted frantically until they landed on Sophie. Relief flooded his features as he rushed forward. "There you are," he exclaimed, dropping to his knees beside her. "Sophie, you can't just run off like that. I was so worried." Sophie looked up at him sheepishly but didn't let go of the millionaire's hand. "I just wanted him to read it, Daddy," she whispered. "He read it for Mom." The father's gaze shifted to the man seated beside her. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He knew who this was, the infamous tycoon whose name dominated newspapers and television screens. He immediately straightened, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry if she disturbed you," he said quickly, his voice laced with apology. "She doesn't always understand boundaries." The millionaire shook his head slowly, still holding Sophie's letter in his trembling hands. His voice came out rough, but sincere. "It wasn't a disturbance," he said. "It was an honor." The father blinked, caught off guard. He expected dismissal, perhaps irritation. Not this. Not a powerful man with tears still shining faintly in his eyes. Sophie leaned against her father now, but her gaze stayed fixed on the man who had read her words with such care, as if he were part of her family. The millionaire hesitated, then carefully folded the fragile paper and handed it back to her. "Keep it safe," he said softly. "It's the most important letter in the world." Sophie hugged it to her chest and nodded solemnly, as though she understood the weight of his words. Her father helped her to her feet, giving a grateful smile. "Thank you," he said simply. "She's been writing those letters ever since, well, since her mom passed. Usually, I read them to her, but she must have felt she needed someone else this time." The millionaire's heart clenched. He looked at the man before him, worn down, tired, but still standing strong for his daughter. It was a quiet kind of courage, the kind that didn't make headlines but changed lives. Something inside him stirred, a resolve he hadn't felt in years. He rose to his feet slowly, adjusting his suit jacket, though the weight of it suddenly felt meaningless compared to the tiny letter he had just read. For years he had built skyscrapers, funded industries, and lived in penthouses that touched the clouds. But none of it compared to the simple act of giving a grieving child his voice when she needed it most. He crouched down again, bringing himself eye level with Sophie. "Would it be okay," he asked gently, "if I kept a copy of your letter? Just for me, to remind me of what really matters." Her face lit up, the sadness replaced by something brighter, purer. "You can," she said firmly. "But you have to promise to read it whenever you forget." His lips curved into something that felt foreign on his face, an unguarded smile. "I promise." The father placed a protective arm around his daughter, preparing to leave. But before he could, the millionaire spoke again, his tone steady with newfound determination. "You've given me something today," he said, glancing between them. "I don't think I can ever repay you. But I'm going to try. Starting with making sure children like Sophie always have someone to read their letters, someone to remind them they're heard." The father looked at him in surprise, unsure what to say. But Sophie just nodded, as though she understood exactly what he meant. As they walked away, the millionaire remained standing in the middle of the lounge, watching them disappear into the crowd. His chest still ached, but it was a different kind of ache now, one filled with purpose. He knew the world would still see him as a ruthless mogul, but from this day forward, he would quietly dedicate his fortune to something greater. All because of a little girl with tear-streaked cheeks who had looked up at him and whispered, "Can you read this letter? It's really important."